Hello. For this video I wanted to talk about a very common situation, barking dogs at the fence line, and the common questions about barking dogs at a fence line is how do you stop them from barking at the fence line? Well, of course, when we're asking questions like how, we're thinking about how an owner would think rather than what a guardian would be thinking, the mindset of an owner rather than the mindset of a guardian. So let's have a look at this video. Not great camera work there. So the dog's barking, very focused, and okay, so the dog's been called away. So that's a very common situation. Now, the mindset of an owner, how would they sort of think about that situation? Well, maybe they might shout at the dog, they might throw something at the dog, they might even hit the dog. That's pretty sad, but that does happen. Maybe they might be sitting at another part of the house and they can't hear the dog barking as loudly as, say, some of all the neighbours can, or the rest of the neighbours can. So it's no big deal for them because, well, why do they need to get up? Because it's not interrupting their phone call or their Facebook or whatever they might be doing. That seems to be more important than their dog actually communicating in a way that's can actually escalate into a bigger problem if we don't actually think like a guardian. Maybe an owner might think, oh, well, somebody's just dropped me off home. My dog's been alone all day for hours and hours and hours. But I'm going to sit in the car and have a chat for another 15 minutes while my dog's barking. Big deal. So that's the sort of mindset that an owner might have about their dog's barking. And of course, that's not going to help the dog. It's not going to change the situation for the dog. And it's only going to escalate things and make problems for the dog. How would a guardian's mindset think in this situation? Well, you'd probably say to yourself, I can hear my dog barking. That sounds like my dog. Hang on. Okay, I'll just listen. 5, 6, 7, 8 barks. Okay, they're barking again. They're still barking. I'm going to get up and stop doing what I'm doing and go and see to my dog, make sure they're okay, investigate the situation, and then divert my dog's attention away from that stimuli back to a place where it's quiet, and I'm going to promote calm behaviour, because that's the most important behaviour that your dog will ever learn, is calm behaviour. And an easy way to do this is to just ask your dog to come into a quiet part of the house, settle on their mat, and just give them something that they'll enjoy, like a long-lasting chew, a rawhide, or any other sort of food puzzle toys. You can see Marco's enjoying some in the background here while I'm doing this video. So that's how a guardian would think. That's the mindset of a guardian. So what we've done there is we've actually changed the emotional state of the dog. We've actually diverted their attention away from something that can be potentially annoying, if you like, and dogs can get very good at barking, and we'll talk about that very soon. So great, we've changed the emotional state, and we've simply done that by thinking like a guardian, not like an owner. So let's go back to the video. Why is the dog barking? Well, it's pretty obvious. The dog's sat right in front of a gate and they can have a really good view of what's going on outside and the footpath. People coming past, other dogs coming past, the postman coming past, other cars coming past. So it's pretty obvious. We've got the dog sitting in a place where there's constant stimuli, or an environment that is likely to have a lot of stimuli and potential triggers that can then motivate that dog to bark. And once again, let's look at what motivates a dog to bark in the first place. Well, first of all, they can be alerting us to something, which is something that is a great thing for our dog to do. They may be bored, they may be frustrated, they may be excited. They might want to join into the activity and they're barking. For example, if you're swimming in a pool and you're making a lot of splashing noises, your dog might be running around the pool and barking and actually hesitating but wanting to jump in but not sure as to whether they can or whether it's safe for them. So there's that conflict and that stress for your dog in that situation. But another reason for dogs to bark, and let's relate this to the body language of that dog. From what we could see, the body language looked quite confident. The tail was held high. The dog was very focused on what was happening that was causing the dog to bark, what was triggering the dog to bark, what was motivating that dog to bark. But the sound of the bark also had quite an urgency to it. And from my point of view, it sounded to me as if it had a little bit of frustration. And of course, the barrier, which is the gate, can also exacerbate the barking because it's frustrating the dog because the dog can't actually get through the gate to then decrease the distance between the dog and whatever the dog is focused on and barking at. Another interesting thing about the body language of the dog was that the tail was wagging. So that can suggest, of course, that the dog would like to interact, but once again, we don't know what sort of interaction it's going to be from the dog. And when we think about another very important reason that dogs bark, and why they bark in those situations, is because from their perspective, they're defending their territory. So they're protecting their territory. And that's also a valid reason. And of course, when we think like a guardian, all of these reasons we see and we understand that there's a valid reason for that dog's behaviour. The dog's in a position where, a lot of stimuli are visible. The dog's also motivated to bark to defend the territory, protect the territory. But also, let's consider some situations or some reasons why the dog may actually be in the vicinity of the gate there. Now, first of all, where else does the dog have to go? Is that the only place that the dog is allowed to be? Is that the only outdoor space that that dog has? So then we can see that if there's not much else interesting inside of the gate or inside that property where the dog is going to turn their attention to something that can provide some sort of mental stimulation of any sort. Now, also, is that where the human is more likely to come home at the end of the day? So is that dog sitting at that gate for hours and hours and hours on end, waiting for the human family to get home? So that says a little bit more concerning things about the dog's emotional state. If the dog feels the need and is compelled to sit and wait and watch out for the owner to come home. And that also brings me to another couple of points. Firstly, if that's the only place that the dog has to rest, forage, explore, toilet, eat, if that's the only place that the dog has to do those things, if the dog doesn't get a chance to rest, for example, because there's lots of stimuli coming past, then that's going to mean that that dog is going to be in a state of heightened arousal. We may see that dog starting to scan the environment for other people coming past. But interestingly, what if that dog was actually able to finally get some rest and some people were walking past with some dogs and the dog didn't hear them until they were almost past the property and the dog was startled awake? So now we have a dog that's been startled awake. That can actually result in aggression, because if a dog has woken up and it's in a confused, startled state, well then that emotional state of that dog can be unpredictable in that situation. So then we could have a situation where that dog is now even more vigilant and looking out for anybody else coming past because of that incident where the dog was startled awake by somebody or something that the dog perceived to be a threat to the territory or the boundary that the dog is defending or protecting. Now, also from the dog's point of view, this is a really interesting point. Anybody walking past, triggering the dog to bark, can be also inadvertently rewarding for the dog that's barking. And this is because, from the dog's perspective, the people are walking past, the dog is barking, the people continue to move away, increase the distance between the property and the dog. So from the dog's point of view, the barking was a successful strategy because, look, I defended my property very well because those people actually moved away from me. They paid attention to my barking and they actually moved away from me. That's from the dog's perspective. But those people were going to walk past in the same direction and increase the distance away anyway, increase the distance anyway from the dog. But from the dog's perception and from the dog's perspective, that was a successful strategy for warding off potential threats to that dog's territory. So then we can see how that behaviour that was rewarding from the dog's point of view can then be one that is a learned behaviour, that is going to be one that the dog goes to automatically if the dog is placed in that situation a number of times or multiple times or over a long period of time. And that brings us to the next interesting point. If that's the only outdoor space that dog has, and that dog might bark at people walking past, cars walking past, the postman coming past, anywhere from, say, 5 to 10 times a day. So if we add that up over a week, or let's be conservative, add that up over 5 days. So that could be anywhere between 25 and 50 times a week. If we want to include weekends, maybe it might be less, but in the position where this house is and what's going on in the video, that I'll play the rest of it shortly, it might actually increase because there may be more people, more dogs, more things going on the weekends. So when we think about the number of times that this dog has had to practice this behaviour, to get better at this behaviour, to rehearse this behaviour, it's no wonder that the dog is getting better at this behaviour. And this behaviour can escalate into social and behavioural problems, and I'll outline that with an example quite shortly. Now just to watch the rest of this video, so let's see what was triggering this dog to have a bit of a bark, and we can see that the dog's being called away and, well, somebody's unloading a little dinghy. And that was taken on a weekend. So you can imagine how noisy that would be for the dog, how confronting, how startling possibly if the dog hadn't seen that before. And so the dog may perceive that as a threat. And of course, that dog is going to justifiably bark and, from the dog's perspective, defend the territory. So that's why it's so important that we actually think from the mindset of a guardian, not an owner. Because when we think from the mindset of an owner, this is what happens to dogs. Now, this is just some footage, some audio that I took when Marco and I were walking around our local neighbourhood. This was probably over around about 2.5 years ago. And if you can believe it, these dogs have actually escalated even more in their behaviour. But this was a couple of years ago. We're just walking past on the opposite side of the road in all cases. Now you can hear the hysterical nature of those three poodles in the last section of the audio. But the very first section, you could hear the different tone of that bark. That was a mixture of had an aggressive tone to it. It was more low and grumbly compared to the bark that we heard in the first footage. That was short, sharp, focused, and directed at something. This barking sounded a little bit more ominous. Now, before you stereotype or put any labels on what type of dog, what breed of dog actually made those noises, the last ones were poodles, but that one was a Labrador, and not a pit bull, not a Doberman or a Rottweiler or any other breed that may be stereotyped as being aggressive. That was a Labrador. So whenever we're looking at barking behaviour, it's a direct reflection on the mental health and welfare of that dog that's barking. The type of bark, how long the dog's barking for, what circumstance, what context the barking is happening in. So this is why it's so important, and I have to really underline this, the importance that we think of ourselves as guardians and not owners of dogs. Because when we think about, just in the US alone, 3 million of those will be surrendered to shelters. So if there's one thing that you can take away from this video, it would be start thinking as a guardian. You'll find so many more answers. You'll be able to help your dog live in harmony with you, and you'll be building a true-hearted bond with your dog. Well, that's where we'll leave the video. and we'll talk again soon.